The centuries roll backward. The empire breathes again. The golden light of dawn spills across the Giza plateau, and the Great Pyramid of Khufu stands not as a ruin, but as a beacon of polished white limestone, blazing against a cobalt sky. The air is thick with the scent of river silt and burning incense. Somewhere beyond these colossal stones, the Nile curves through a green ribbon of farmland, feeding a civilization that will endure for more than 3,000 years. This is Egypt, not as a memory, but as a living world. We stand at the threshold of the longest continuous civilization the ancient world ever produced. What began as scattered camps of nomadic herders drifting toward the Nile as the Sahara turned to dust around 5,000 years before Christ became a unified kingdom under a ruler named Narmer, who merged the red crown of the Delta with the white crown of the South. From that single act of unification, a story unfolds that stretches across millennia, across golden ages and devastating collapses, across monuments so vast they still defy explanation. We will journey from the very beginning of this civilization, from the reed huts and painted pottery of the Nakada culture along the riverbanks, through the revolutionary moment when the architect Imhotep raised the step pyramid at Saqqara and changed construction forever. We will stand in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, where 2,300,000 limestone blocks were stacked with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to fully account for. We will witness the reunification of a fractured land under Mentuhotep II at Thebes, walk the corridors of Karnak as it grew into the largest sacred complex ever built, and sail with Hatshepsut's fleet to the distant land of Punt. We will follow Thutmose III as his chariots thunder across Megiddo and push Egypt's borders to the Euphrates. We will enter the strange new city of Akhetaten, where the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten abandoned the old gods for a single solar disk. We will gaze upon the golden mask of Tutankhamun, 11 kilograms of solid gold shaped into the face of a boy king who died at 19. And we will stand before the 4 colossal statues of Ramesses the Great at Abu Simbel, carved into living rock, aligned so perfectly that twice each year the rising sun illuminates the sanctuary deep within the mountain. But this is not only a story of pharaohs and monuments. We will explore the village of Deir el-Medina, where the artisans who carved the royal tombs lived, argued, wrote love poems on broken pottery, and staged the first recorded labor strike in human history. We will examine the surgical techniques described in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, the trade networks that brought lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and cedarwood from Lebanon, and the 70-day ritual of mummification that prepared the dead for eternity. We will also witness the long decline, the sea peoples crashing against the delta, the kingdom fracturing between rival dynasties at Tanis and Thebes, the arrival of Libyan, Nubian, Assyrian and Persian rulers who each claimed the double crown. We will walk the grid-planned streets of Alexandria, where the great lighthouse rose over 100 meters above the harbor and the library held 400,000 scrolls. And we will be there at the end, when Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, fell to Rome, and Egypt became a province of Augustus. What you are about to see shaped the world we live in today. The calendar we use, the architectural principles that govern our greatest buildings, medical knowledge that influenced Hippocrates, and concepts of afterlife judgment that echo through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all trace threads back to the banks of this single river. Some of the greatest mysteries of human achievement are hidden in these stones, and by the end of this series, you will understand not just what happened, but how an entire civilization rose, flourished, and transformed the course of history. This is not just a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from the first flint tools pressed into Nile clay to the moment in 1822 when Jean-François Champollion decoded the Rosetta Stone and reopened a door sealed for 14 centuries. If you enjoy these complete journeys through ancient civilizations, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost world, told with the depth and detail it deserves. Now, let us begin our journey. The Nile is rising, the silt is spreading across the floodplain, and somewhere in the distance, the first farmers of Egypt are planting their seeds in the black earth. Long before the pyramids, long before the first pharaoh wore a crown, there is only the river. It moves north through a corridor of stone and sand, swelling each summer with rains that fall thousands of kilometers to the south in the highlands of Ethiopia. When the floodwaters recede, they leave behind a dark, rich silt, a ribbon of fertility cutting through one of the driest landscapes on earth. This is the gift. This is the beginning. Around 5,000 years before the Common Era, the world above the Nile Valley is changing. The vast Sahara, once a green savanna dotted with shallow lakes and roaming herds of cattle, is drying. Century by century, the grasslands retreat. Riverbeds turn to dust. The animals move on, and the people who hunted them follow the only reliable water left. They drift toward the Nile in small bands, carrying with them the knowledge of cattle herding and the first tentative skills of grain cultivation. Emmer wheat and barley take root in the black silt. Settlements form along the riverbanks, clusters of reed huts, simple granaries dug into the earth, hearths where bread bakes on heated stones. By roughly 4,400 years before the Common Era, a culture archaeologists call Badarian emerges in Upper Egypt. These communities fashioned thin-walled pottery burnished to a deep reddish brown, the rims deliberately blackened by firing upside down in ash. They bury their dead facing west toward the setting sun, with grave goods of ivory combs, shell beads, and flint blades, already suggesting a belief that death is not an ending. The centuries that follow witness a slow intensification. The Naqada culture, named for a site near the Great Bend of the Nile, evolves through 3 distinct phases spanning more than 1,000 years. In its earliest stage, potters paint vessels with images of flamingos, hippos, and boats gliding across water. Flint knappers produce blades of extraordinary refinement, some so thin they are nearly translucent. Copper begins to appear, hammered cold into pins and small tools. Trade networks stretch outward, obsidian from Ethiopia, shells from the Red Sea coast, lapis lazuli carried overland from distant Afghanistan. During the second Naqada phase, settlements grow larger. Mud brick architecture appears alongside reed construction. Certain graves become richer than others, filled with decorated pottery, stone pallets for grinding cosmetics, and carved ivory figurines. Social hierarchy is crystallizing. Power concentrates in the hands of local chieftains who control surplus grain and trade routes. By the third Naqada phase, around 3,300 years before the Common Era, the trajectory is unmistakable. Towns like Hierakonpolis and Abydos function as regional capitals. Elaborate painted tombs belong to rulers whose authority extends over entire stretches of the valley. At Abydos, in a burial chamber known as Tomb Uj. Small bone and ivory labels bear some of the earliest known hieroglyphic signs, short notations marking the origin of goods, the names of estates, perhaps the identity of the ruler himself. These marks, scratched into tags no larger than a thumbnail, represent the first stirrings of a writing system that will endure for more than 3,000 years. The Nile itself dictates the rhythm of everything. Its annual flood arrives with remarkable predictability, depositing fresh soil, filling irrigation basins, renewing the agricultural cycle. Communities that master the management of floodwater thrive. Those that fail are absorbed by stronger neighbors. Slowly, inevitably, the dozens of small chiefdoms along the river consolidate into two broad spheres of influence, one in the narrow valley of the south, one in the broad delta marshlands of the north. Two lands not yet united, but already bound by the same river, the same silt, the same sun overhead. The stage is set for something unprecedented. Around 3,100 years before the Common Era, a king from the southern valley marches north. His name survives on a single slab of carved grey-wacky stone, barely 63 centimeters tall, the Narmer palette, discovered at Hierakonpolis in 1898. On one face, the king wears the tall white crown of Upper Egypt and raises a mace above a kneeling captive. On the reverse, he processes in the flat, red crown of Lower Egypt, inspecting rows of decapitated enemies. Whether this records a single decisive battle or the culmination of generations of conflict remains debated, but the message carved into the stone is unambiguous. One ruler now claims dominion over both lands. The unification transforms the Nile corridor from a patchwork of competing chiefdoms into a single territorial state stretching over 1,000 kilometers. Narmer and his immediate successors establish a capital at Memphis, positioned with strategic precision at the junction where the narrow valley opens into the broad delta. The city commands both regions simultaneously. Mud brick walls rise around palace compounds. Administrative buildings multiply. Memphis becomes the hinge upon which the entire kingdom turns. At Abydos in the south, the earliest kings construct their tombs, rectangular mud brick structures sunk into the desert gravel, surrounded by subsidiary burials of retainers who accompanied their sovereign into death. These mastaba tombs contain ivory labels, ceramic vessels filled with oils and grain, and copper tools. At Saqqara, near Memphis, a parallel set of elite tombs emerges, their facades decorated with recessed niching that imitates palace architecture in miniature. The dead require the same grandeur as the living. The administrative demands of governing two lands accelerate the development of writing. What began as simple pictographic tags on pottery and ivory now expands into a full hieroglyphic system capable of recording royal names, titles, inventories, and ritual formulae. Cylinder seals pressed into wet clay authenticate official documents. Scribes become essential functionaries. The bureaucracy that will sustain Egypt for 3 millennia takes its first recognizable shape during the First and Second Dynasties, a period spanning roughly 4 centuries. Provincial governors called nomarchs administer the 42 nomes, territorial districts that follow the natural geography of the valley and delta. Tax collection depends on measuring the height of the annual flood, because the inundation determines agricultural yield, and agricultural yield determines the wealth of the state. Granaries swell with emmer wheat and barley. Linen production, cattle herding, and fishing supplement the grain economy. Surplus feeds the growing specialist classes: potters, metalworkers, stone cutters, priests. The theological framework solidifies alongside the political one. The pharaoh is no longer merely a powerful chieftain. He embodies Horus, the falcon god, a living bridge between the divine and human realms. The double crown, the combined white and red, becomes the supreme symbol of unified authority. Royal rituals performed at Memphis and Abydos reinforce the sacred nature of kingship. The said festival, a jubilee of renewal, appears in its earliest form during this period, binding the physical vitality of the king to the prosperity of the land itself. By the close of the Second Dynasty, around 2686 before the Common Era, the foundations are complete. A centralized monarchy governs from Memphis. A literate bureaucracy manages resources across two distinct ecological zones. A religious ideology sanctifies royal power. Monumental tomb architecture in mud brick has reached impressive scale, and stoneworkers are beginning to experiment with limestone casing and granite elements. The kingdom possesses the organizational capacity, the material wealth, and the theological ambition to attempt something no civilization has ever tried: building for eternity in stone. The plateau at Saqqara rises west of Memphis, a limestone shelf overlooking the floodplain where the capital's mud brick buildings crowd the riverbank. For generations, kings have been buried here beneath flat-topped mastabas, rectangular tombs of sun-dried brick that mimic the palaces of the living. But around 2670 before the Common Era, a pharaoh of the Third Dynasty named Giza commissioned something that has never existed anywhere on Earth: a tomb built entirely of cut stone, rising not in a single flat tier, but in 6 diminishing stages toward the sky. The mind behind this transformation belongs to Imhotep, a man whose titles accumulate like the courses of masonry he oversees. Chancellor of the King of Lower Egypt, first after the King of Upper Egypt, administrator of the Great Palace, hereditary nobleman, high priest of Heliopolis, chief sculptor, and chief carpenter. Later generations will also remember him as a physician of extraordinary skill. No single individual in Egyptian history before him carries such breadth of authority, and no architect before him dares to translate the impermanence of mud brick into the permanence of limestone on this scale. The project begins modestly. The original plan calls for a square mastaba, larger than its predecessors but still recognizable in form. Quarry workers cut blocks from the limestone bedrock nearby, shaping them smaller than the massive stones later pharaohs will use, closer in size to the mud bricks they replace. Then the design changes. A second mastaba rises atop the first. Then another. The concept evolves through at least 6 phases of construction until the final form emerges: a stepped tower of 6 tiers climbing 62 meters above the desert floor, visible from Memphis and the Green Valley below. Surrounding this unprecedented monument spreads a ceremonial complex enclosed by a niched limestone wall stretching more than 1,500 meters in perimeter. The wall itself imitates the palace facade pattern once rendered in mud brick, now translated faithfully into stone. Inside, a colonnade of 40 ribbed columns, the earliest stone columns in architectural history, flanks a processional corridor. These columns are not freestanding but attached to walls, as though the builders do not yet fully trust stone to support itself without lateral bracing. Dummy buildings with carved stone doors that never open replicate the pavilions used during the said festival, freezing ritual architecture in mineral permanence. Beneath the pyramid, a vertical shaft plunges 28 meters to a granite burial vault. Surrounding corridors branch into a subterranean palace, decorated with thousands of small, blue-green faience tiles arranged to mimic reed mat hangings. The color is deliberate, the blue of renewal, of the primordial waters from which creation emerged. Carved limestone panels show Giza striding through his eternal jubilee, forever young, forever sovereign. Imhotep's genius lies not merely in choosing stone over brick, but in understanding that stone demands an entirely different structural logic. Mud brick walls rely on mass. Limestone permits precision. Joints can be tighter, surfaces smoother, details finer. The fluted columns at Saqqara echo the bundled papyrus stalks of earlier reed architecture, but they will endure for millennia rather than decades. The workforce that accomplishes this transformation is organized with the same administrative machinery perfected during the first two dynasties. Copper chisels and dolerite pounders shape the blocks. Wooden sledges dragged over wetted sand move them into position. The logistics of feeding, housing, and coordinating thousands of laborers across years of construction represent a state operating at the edge of its organizational capacity. Giza's reign, spanning roughly 19 years, sees the completion of this complex and the establishment of Saqqara as the primary royal necropolis for Memphis. When Imhotep dies, his reputation only grows. Within centuries, he is venerated as a demigod of wisdom and healing. By the late period, more than 2,000 years after his death, he is fully deified, one of the very few non-royal Egyptians ever granted that honor. The step pyramid stands as proof of concept. Stone can defy time. A kingdom that masters its quarrying, its labor, and its geometry can build monuments that outlast every dynasty that follows. The pharaohs of the next generation absorb this lesson completely, and their ambitions will dwarf even Giza's towering experiment on the Saqqara plateau. Sneferu, first king of the fourth dynasty, inherits the lesson carved into Saqqara's skyline and pushes it further than anyone thought possible. At Meidum, south of Memphis, his builders attempt a true smooth-sided pyramid, but the outer casing collapses during or after construction, leaving a strange tower rising from rubble. Undeterred, Sneferu moves north to Dashur. There, the bent pyramid begins at a steep angle of 54 degrees before its builders reduce the slope midway to 43 degrees, producing a distinctive double profile visible for miles across the floodplain. A third attempt, the Red Pyramid nearby, finally achieves a stable true pyramid form at 43 degrees. Sneferu alone uses more stone than any other pharaoh in Egyptian history, and his three monuments represent the trial and error that makes Giza possible. His son Khufu ascends the throne around 2589 before the Common Era and selects a limestone plateau 8 kilometers southwest of modern Cairo. The site is no accident. Bedrock here is strong enough to bear millions of tons, a nearby quarry provides core blocks, and the western horizon aligns the monument with the realm of the dead. Over roughly 2 decades, a workforce estimated between 20,000 and 30,000 organized laborers raises the Great Pyramid to a height of 146 meters. It contains approximately 2.3 million blocks averaging 2.5 tons each, though granite beams above the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons apiece, quarried at Aswan and shipped nearly 1,000 kilometers downriver. The construction is not slave labor. Archaeological excavations at the workers' village east of the plateau reveal bakeries producing thousands of bread loaves daily, breweries, fish processing facilities, and medical care including healed bone fractures. The laborers rotate in crews with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkore, organized into gangs of roughly 1,000 men subdivided into smaller teams. Copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and wooden sledges lubricated with water move stone from quarry face to ramp. The precise method of raising blocks remains debated, but internal ramp theories and straight external ramp models both account for the logistics within the known workforce size. When completed, the Great Pyramid wears a skin of fine Tura limestone, polished until it gleams white under the desert sun. A gilded capstone catches the first and last light of each day. Inside, 3 chambers mark an evolving plan. A subterranean room cut into bedrock, a middle chamber abandoned midway, and the king's chamber lined entirely in Aswan granite, holding a single sarcophagus carved from a block too large to fit through the ascending passage, meaning it was placed during construction. Khufu's son Khafre builds the second Giza pyramid on slightly higher ground, creating the illusion of equal height, though it stands 3 meters shorter. His valley temple, constructed of massive alabaster-floored granite blocks, connects via a covered causeway to the mortuary temple above. Beside this causeway, workers carve the Great Sphinx directly from a natural limestone outcrop, a recumbent lion with a royal human head, 73 meters long, gazing east toward the rising sun. Erosion patterns on its body suggest the bedrock was shaped in a single concentrated campaign. The third pyramid belongs to Menkaure, Khafre's successor. Significantly smaller at 65 meters, it nonetheless features a lower casing of Aswan granite, some blocks left only partially smoothed, offering modern observers a frozen snapshot of the finishing process. Surrounding all 3 pyramids, smaller queens' pyramids, mastaba tombs of officials, and boat pits complete a necropolis that functions as a city of the dead, mirroring the administrative hierarchy of the living. The Giza Plateau represents the absolute peak of pyramid construction. No later dynasty matches this scale. The resources required, limestone, granite, copper, cedar timber, food surplus, administrative coordination, reflect a centralized state operating at maximum capacity. The 4th dynasty channels the entire wealth of the Nile Valley upward into stone, creating monuments that will outlast every structure built in the following 4,500 years. Yet this concentration of power carries a cost. The treasury strains, provincial administrators grow essential, and the pharaohs who follow will seek the favor of the sun god Ra through different, less colossal means. The shift begins almost immediately. Usakaf, first king of the 5th dynasty, ascends the throne around 2494 before the Common Era, and the monumental ambitions of the state pivot from sheer mass toward light itself. His pyramid at Saqqara is modest compared to the mountains at Giza, barely half the height of Khufu's Colossus. The limestone blocks are smaller, the core fill rougher. But a short distance north, at Abu Ghorob, Usakaf raises something Egypt has never seen, a sun temple open to the sky. The structure defies every principle of the enclosed, sealed pyramid. Where Khufu's burial chamber hides deep within 2 million blocks of stone, Usakaf's sun temple spreads outward, a vast rectangular courtyard oriented to catch the full arc of the sun's daily passage. At its center stands a squat, broad-based obelisk built of limestone blocks, a benben stone, the primordial mound upon which the first rays of creation fell according to Heliopolitan theology. An alabaster altar rests at the obelisk's base, its surface carved with the hieroglyph for the sun disk, flanked by loaves of bread, a permanent offering frozen in stone. Cattle are slaughtered in open-air corridors fitted with drainage channels that carry blood into basins carved from the bedrock. The entire complex functions not as a tomb, but as a machine for feeding the sun god Ra in perpetuity. 6 kings of the 5th dynasty build at least 6 of these solar temples, though only 2 survive in identifiable form. The theology driving this construction radiates from Heliopolis, the city the Egyptians call Unu, situated at the southern tip of the delta. Here the priesthood of Ra has accumulated influence across generations, and the 5th dynasty's origin legend, preserved in a later papyrus called Westcar, claims these kings are literally sons of Ra, born to the wife of a priest. Whether historical or mythological, the claim reshapes royal ideology. From Userkaf onward, every pharaoh incorporates the title Son of Ra into the royal titulary, a designation that will endure for the next 25 centuries. The priesthood's growing authority means land grants, tax exemptions, and administrative positions flow toward temple estates. Provincial officials who once answered solely to the palace now negotiate with religious institutions commanding their own granaries, cattle herds, and workforces. The centralized power that built Giza disperses slowly, like floodwater spreading beyond its channel. Yet the 5th dynasty's most enduring legacy lies not in temples but in text. Around 2350 before the Common Era, the last king of the dynasty, Unas, constructs a small pyramid at Saqqara. Its exterior is unremarkable, its limestone casing crumbling even in antiquity. But inside the burial chamber, every surface erupts with vertical columns of hieroglyphs carved into the limestone and filled with blue-green pigment. These are the pyramid texts, the oldest corpus of religious literature known to exist anywhere on Earth. 783 individual utterances describe the king's journey through the afterlife. Spells to protect against snakes in the underworld, incantations to transform the dead pharaoh into a star among the circumpolar constellations that never set, hymns identifying the king with Osiris in the realm of the dead and with Ra in the sky at dawn. The texts reveal a theology of extraordinary complexity. The afterlife is not a single destination, but a series of gates, waterways, and fields requiring precise knowledge to navigate. The king must know the names of divine gatekeepers, must recite formulas at exact moments, must become both the judge and the justified. These inscriptions will evolve across centuries into the coffin texts of the Middle Kingdom and ultimately into the Book of the Dead, a literary lineage spanning 1,500 years. Unas dies around 2345 before the Common Era. His pyramid stands barely 43 meters tall, dwarfed by the monuments of the previous dynasty. But within its modest walls, Egypt has accomplished something the pyramid builders of Giza never attempted: the translation of an entire cosmology into written language, preserved in stone where neither moisture nor time can easily reach. The age of overwhelming mass gives way to the age of the sacred word. The sacred word endures inside the pyramid of Unas, but the kingdom that carved it is already beginning to fracture. The 6th dynasty opens with rulers who still command monumental projects, still send expeditions to the turquoise mines of Sinai and the alabaster quarries of Hatnub. Yet a slow erosion has begun beneath the surface of royal authority, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. Pepi II ascends the throne around 2278, before the Common Era, as a child of no more than 6 years. His reign will stretch across 94 years, the longest in recorded Egyptian history, and it will witness the slow unraveling of everything the pyramid builders constructed. In the early decades, the boy king's regents maintain order. Expeditions reach Nubia, where the governor Harkuf famously returns with a dancing pygmy that delights the young pharaoh. Trade routes remain open. Temples receive their offerings. But as the decades accumulate, the center weakens. Provincial governors who once served at the pleasure of Memphis begin to treat their offices as hereditary possessions. These nomarchs build their own elaborate tombs in local cemeteries far from the royal necropolis, decorating them with scenes that reflect regional artistic traditions rather than the rigid court style of the capital. At Mer, at Deir el-Gabrawi, at Aswan, rock-cut tombs display a confident independence that would have been unthinkable under Khufu. The nomarchs collect their own taxes, maintain their own militias, administer justice in their own names. Memphis still exists as a ceremonial center, but its gravitational pull diminishes with each passing year of Pepi's impossibly long life. When the old king finally dies around 2184 before the Common Era, the throne passes through a series of ephemeral rulers whose names barely survive. The 7th and 8th dynasties at Memphis become little more than a list of shadows, kings who reign for months or single years before vanishing from the record. The irrigation networks that sustained the floodplain require centralized maintenance, coordinated labor across multiple provinces. Without that coordination, canals silt up. Fields that once produced surplus grain yield less each season. Archaeological evidence suggests that Nile floods during this period may have been unusually low, compounding the administrative failure with environmental crisis. Famine settles across the valley. The text known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer, though debated in its precise dating, preserves a literary memory of this era's anguish. It describes a world inverted, grain stores empty, the poor possessing what once belonged to the wealthy, violence replacing law. Whether composed during the crisis or shortly after, the text captures a psychological rupture in Egyptian consciousness. The idea that cosmic order could fail, that the divine kingship might prove insufficient, marks a profound shift in how Egyptians understand their own civilization. Two rival power centers emerge from the wreckage. At Heracleopolis, near the entrance to the Fayum, the 9th and 10th dynasties claim legitimate succession from Memphis. To the south, Theban rulers of the 11th dynasty consolidate control over Upper Egypt. The two houses wage intermittent war across the middle provinces. Tomb inscriptions from Asyut record local governors defending their territory against Theban advances, proud of their military service to the Heracleopolitan kings. Provincial art from this period tells its own story. Wooden tomb models replace the grand stone reliefs of the Old Kingdom. Miniature granaries, breweries, fishing boats, and marching soldiers populate burial chambers, rendered with a lively informality that contrasts sharply with the monumental rigidity of earlier centuries. These models reveal communities turned inward, focused on local survival rather than cosmic ambition. The cracked mud brick walls of abandoned estates line the floodplain. Construction sites at minor pyramids stand unfinished, their ramps leading nowhere. The centralized state that once moved 2.5-ton blocks with bureaucratic precision cannot now keep a canal clear. Egypt enters its first great darkness, a period of roughly 140 years during which no single ruler commands the two lands. The memory of this fracture will haunt Egyptian political thought for centuries, becoming the cautionary backdrop against which every future reunification is measured. Far to the south, where the Nile carves a broad curve between desert cliffs, a provincial city refuses to accept the darkness. Thebes, known to its inhabitants as Waset, sits roughly 450 miles upstream from the ruins of Memphis's authority. During the decades of fragmentation, its local rulers have steadily consolidated power, absorbing neighboring nomes, training soldiers, and cultivating a fierce devotion to the war god Montu. By the early 21st century before the Common Era, the 11th dynasty controls Upper Egypt from the First Cataract to the region around Abydos, but the north remains in the hands of the rival Heracleopolitan kings. Egypt is still two lands, and the memory of unity has become both wound and aspiration. Mentuhotep II inherits this divided kingdom around 2055, before the Common Era. His Horus name, chosen deliberately, translates as "he who inspires the heart of the two lands." The claim is audacious for a ruler who controls only half the country. Yet over the course of a campaign lasting nearly 39 years, he makes the name a reality. His armies push northward in stages, seizing Middle Egyptian towns, breaking Heracleopolitan resistance district by district. Mass graves excavated near Deir el-Bahari hold the linen-wrapped bodies of 60 soldiers, their wounds consistent with arrows and close-quarters combat. These men died taking the north back. The reunification is not a single dramatic battle, but a grinding generational effort. Garrison by garrison, nome by nome, the Theban forces extend control until the delta itself submits. For the first time in over a century, one pharaoh rules from the cataracts to the Mediterranean coast. Mentuhotep consolidates his victory through administrative reform, appointing loyal Theban officials to govern formerly independent provinces and re-establishing the taxation networks that had collapsed during the intermediate period. The landscape of power shifts permanently southward. Memphis retains economic importance, but Thebes becomes the political and spiritual heart of the restored kingdom. On the west bank, where the limestone cliffs rise in a dramatic amphitheater above the floodplain, Mentuhotep commissions a mortuary temple unlike anything Egypt has seen. At Deir el-Bahari, terraces of dressed limestone ascend the slope in broad platforms connected by central ramps. Colonnades of square pillars line each level, their surfaces carved with painted reliefs depicting the military campaigns that forged reunification. Scenes show Nubian and Libyan enemies subdued, the king smiting adversaries in the ancient ritual pose, the gods of Thebes blessing his victories. The temple's design merges tomb and monument in a new architectural vocabulary. A deep passage cut into the cliff behind the uppermost terrace leads to the burial chamber itself, embedding the pharaoh within the sacred mountain. Surrounding the main structure, a grove of tamarisk and sycamore fig trees is planted in pits carved into the bedrock, creating a garden in the desert that symbolizes regeneration. Painted statues of the king in the wrappings of Osiris stand in niches along the ambulatory, their black skin representing the fertile silt of resurrection. the theological implications run deep. By anchoring his eternal monument at Thebes rather than in the Memphite necropolis, Mentuhotep elevates the local god Amun alongside the older solar theology of Ra. The seeds of Amun's eventual supremacy over the Egyptian pantheon are planted here, in this cliff-face temple above the western bank. Theban priests gain influence that will compound across centuries. Mentuhotep's successors, the third and fourth of that name, maintain stability but lack his transformative energy. The 11th dynasty fades quietly, and around 1985 before the Common Era, a vizier named Amenemhat seizes the throne, founding the 12th dynasty and opening a new era of Egyptian civilization. But the template is set. Thebes has proven that unity can be rebuilt from the margins, that a provincial city with sufficient will can reconstitute an empire. The terraced temple at Deir el-Bahari stands as proof, its colonnades catching the first light of morning, while the Nile curves silver and silent through the valley below. Amenemhat I moves the royal residence north, away from Thebes and its powerful priesthood, establishing a new administrative capital called Ichtawi, near the entrance to the Fayyum Basin. The name itself declares intent: Caesar of the two lands. From this strategically central position, roughly 30 kilometers south of the old capital Memphis, the 12th dynasty begins reshaping Egypt into something more disciplined, more literate, and more architecturally ambitious than anything the Old Kingdom achieved. The new dynasty governs through a system of co-regencies, father and son sharing the throne to ensure seamless succession. Amenemhat I rules alongside his son Senusret I for a decade before an assassination plot claims the elder king. The event reverberates through Egyptian literature for centuries. The instruction of Amenemhat, composed posthumously in the old king's voice, warns of treachery even among trusted courtiers. It becomes a scribal school classic, copied onto papyrus and ostraca for generations, its hieratic characters flowing in the elegant cursive hand that defines this era. This is Egypt's literary golden age. The tale of Sinuhe, perhaps the finest work of ancient Egyptian prose, tells of a court official who flees abroad after Amenemhat's death, lives among Asiatic nomads, and ultimately returns to Egypt to be buried properly. Scribes reproduce it obsessively. Its language becomes the standard of classical Egyptian, the benchmark against which all subsequent writing is measured. But the 12th dynasty builds with mud and stone as fluently as it builds with words. West of the Nile, the Fayyum Depression becomes a vast agricultural project. Engineers widen natural channels connecting the river to the low-lying basin, regulating water flow into what the Greeks will later call Lake Moeris. Marshland transforms into some of Egypt's richest farmland. Green fields spread where papyrus swamps once stood, and the surplus grain feeds an expanding state apparatus. To the south, the dynasty projects military power deep into Nubia. Senusret III, the most aggressive of the line, campaigns repeatedly beyond the Second Cataract, pushing the frontier to Semna. Massive mud-brick fortresses rise along the Nile at Buhan, Megissa, Uronati, and Semna itself. Buhan's walls stand nearly 11 meters high, reinforced with bastions and dry moats cut into bedrock. These are not symbolic monuments. They are functional military installations controlling trade in gold, ebony, incense, and enslaved people flowing north from Inner Africa. Boundary stelae erected by Senusret III warn future kings to hold this line, declaring any son who fails to maintain it no true heir. The statuary of this period breaks with Old Kingdom idealism. Royal portraits of Senusret III show a face carved with deep furrows, heavy-lidded eyes, and a down-turned mouth suggesting the burden of rule. These are not flattering images. They are deliberate projections of vigilant authority, among the most psychologically complex portraits in ancient art. At Hawara, near the Fayum, Amenemhat III constructs a mortuary complex so elaborate that Herodotus, visiting 15 centuries later, declares it more impressive than the pyramids themselves. He describes 3,000 rooms, half above ground and half below, connected by winding passages. Modern archaeology has confirmed a vast foundation platform, though the superstructure is largely destroyed. The so-called labyrinth remains one of Egypt's great lost monuments. The dynasty's administrative reach extends through a professional bureaucracy of scribes, tax collectors, and provincial governors now firmly subordinate to the crown. Census records, land surveys, and labor conscription lists survive on papyrus, revealing a state that counts its people, measures its fields, and plans its expenditures with remarkable precision. Yet the final rulers of the line falter. Amenemhat IV and Queen Sobekneferu, one of the rare women to hold full pharaonic titles, close the dynasty around 1773 before the Common Era without strong successors. The 13th dynasty that follows produces dozens of short-lived kings, and centralized authority begins to loosen once more. The fortresses in Nubia grow isolated. The literary language endures, but the political structure that sustained it is already fraying at its edges. The fraying accelerates with startling speed. As the 13th dynasty cycles through rulers who reign for months rather than decades, a power vacuum opens in the eastern delta, and through it poor people the Egyptians will call the Hekau Kasut, rulers of foreign lands. Later Greek writers render the name as Hyksos. They do not arrive all at once. For generations, Asiatic traders and herders from the Levant have settled in the northeastern delta, drawn by fertile pasture land and commercial opportunity. The site of Tel el-Daba, ancient Avaris, reveals their gradual presence through archaeological layers: Canaanite-style temples with broad room plans, burial customs that include weapons placed beside the dead, and donkey sacrifices at tomb entrances that have no precedent in Egyptian tradition. What begins as migration hardens into political control. By roughly 1650 before the Common Era, a Hyksos dynasty, the 15th, rules from Avaris as legitimate pharaohs, adopting hieroglyphic titulary and the sun god Ra into their royal names while maintaining their own cultural practices. Their military advantage is decisive. The Hyksos bring technologies Egypt has never encountered on a battlefield: the horse-drawn chariot, light and fast, with spoked wheels and a platform for an archer; the composite bow, laminated from horn, wood, and sinew, capable of launching arrows farther and with greater penetrating force than the simple self-bow Egyptian soldiers carry; bronze khopesh swords with curved, cutting edges. Horse burials uncovered at Tel el-Daba confirm the animal's new military significance: paired equine skeletons interred with care, their bones showing the wear of harness and labor. Avaris itself grows into a sprawling city covering more than 250 hectares, one of the largest settlements in the ancient Near East. Its palace complexes feature Minoan-style frescoes, bull-leaping scenes painted in vivid blue and red, evidence of diplomatic or trade connections stretching across the Mediterranean to Crete. The Hyksos do not destroy Egyptian culture. They absorb and adapt it, worshipping Seth as an equivalent of their storm god, patronizing scribal traditions, and maintaining administrative continuity in the territories they control. But they do not control everything. Upper Egypt remains under a Theban dynasty, the 17th, which governs from Thebes as vassals paying tribute northward. For decades, this arrangement holds in uneasy equilibrium. Then resistance ignites. The mummy of Sekenenre Tao, recovered in the 19th century, tells a violent story. His skull bears at least 5 distinct wounds inflicted by different weapons, including an axe blow above the right eye consistent with Hyksos-style battle axes. Whether he fell in open battle or a more targeted assault remains uncertain, but his shattered face is evidence that the war for reunification has begun in earnest. His successor, Kamosi, takes up the cause with ferocity. 2 great stelae erected at Karnak preserve his war narrative. The interception of a Hyksos messenger carrying a letter to the king of Kush, requesting a coordinated attack against Thebes from the south, and Kamosi's own naval raids deep into the delta waterways, his soldiers glimpsing the walls of Avaris itself. Kamosi dies before the campaign concludes, but the momentum is irreversible. It falls to Ahmose I, likely Kamosi's younger brother, to finish what 2 predecessors began. Around 1550 before the Common Era, Egyptian forces breach the defenses of Avaris. The city falls. The Hyksos retreat into southern Canaan, pursued by Ahmose's army to the fortress of Sheruhen, which endures a siege lasting perhaps 3 years before it too collapses. Egypt is reunified under a single Theban dynasty, the 18th, and a new era dawns. The irony is profound. The very weapons the Hyksos introduced, chariots, composite bows, improved bronze working, now belong to Egypt. The humiliation of foreign occupation forges a militarized state determined never to be vulnerable again. Thebes, twice the city that refused to surrender, stands poised to launch an empire. The militarized state wastes no time. Ahmose I, having expelled the Hyksos and reunified the 2 lands, turns immediately to securing borders that a century of division left dangerously exposed. Egyptian armies push south into Nubia, reclaiming territory lost during the Second Intermediate Period, re-establishing control over gold mining regions between the First and Second Cataracts. The wealth that flows northward along the river, raw gold, ebony, ivory, incense, leopard skins, transforms Thebes from a provincial rebel stronghold into an imperial treasury. Ahmose channels this wealth toward the god who granted victory. At Karnak, on the east bank of the Nile at Thebes, he initiates construction projects honoring Amun, the Hidden One, patron deity of the Theban dynasty. What begins as modest limestone chapels and cedarwood bark shrines will grow across generations into the largest religious complex the ancient world ever produces. Every pharaoh of the 18th dynasty adds to it, each gateway and colonnade a stone prayer of gratitude and legitimacy. Ahmose's son Amenhotep I continues the consolidation, strengthening administrative networks, appointing loyal governors, and expanding temple estates. But it is the next ruler, Thutmose I, who transforms Egypt from a reunified kingdom into a continental empire. A military commander before ascending the throne, Thutmose I leads campaigns of unprecedented ambition. In the south, Egyptian forces advance beyond the Fourth Cataract of the Nile, deeper into Nubian territory than any pharaoh before him. Fortresses rise along the riverbanks, garrisoned outposts ensuring that Nubian gold continues flowing into Egyptian coffers without interruption. Then Thutmose turns north. Egyptian war chariots, the very technology absorbed from the Hyksos occupation, thunder across the Sinai Desert and into the Levant. City-states in Canaan submit or face siege. The army presses onward through Syria, past cedar forests, across rivers, until it reaches the western bank of the Euphrates. There, at the edge of Mitanni territory, Thutmose I erects a victory stela, marking the farthest extent of Egyptian power. No Egyptian ruler has ever stood this far from the Nile. The empire now stretches roughly 1,600 kilometers from the Fourth Cataract to the great river of Mesopotamia. The administrative machinery required to govern this territory is formidable. A vizier oversees domestic affairs. Military commanders hold garrison posts across Canaan. Nubian territories fall under a viceroy bearing the title King's Son of Kush. Tribute flows inward from every direction, gold and cattle from the south, timber and oils from the north, copper from Sinai, turquoise from desert mines. Painted tomb walls in the Theban necropolis begin depicting long processions of foreign delegates bearing exotic goods, their clothing and features rendered with careful ethnographic detail. Karnak swells with each returning army. Thutmose I raises new pylons, erects obelisks quarried from Aswan granite, and expands the sacred precinct of Amun. The temple becomes a theological map of empire, its walls inscribed with campaign records, its storerooms filled with captured wealth dedicated to the god. The priesthood of Amun grows in power and landholding, a parallel authority that will shape Egyptian politics for centuries. Thutmose II, son and successor, rules briefly and without the military vigor of his father. His reign is quiet, consolidating rather than expanding. But the dynasty's momentum is far from spent. Upon his death, the throne passes to his young son, Thutmose III, still a child. A regent steps forward to govern in his name. Hatshepsut, royal wife and daughter of Thutmose I, a woman of extraordinary political intelligence. What begins as regency will become something Egypt has never seen, a transformation so audacious it reshapes the very iconography of kingship. The empire Ahmose forged and Thutmose I expanded now stands at the threshold of its most remarkable reign. Within 7 years of assuming the regency, Hatshepsut does what no Egyptian woman before her has accomplished with such deliberate permanence. She does not merely govern in the shadow of the boy king Thutmose III. She claims the full titulary of Pharaoh, adopting the throne name Mat-Kare, meaning truth is the soul of the sun god Ra. Royal artists begin depicting her in the traditional male regalia of kingship, the Nemes headdress, the Shendit kilt, the ceremonial false beard projecting from her chin. This is not disguise, it is theology. The pharaoh is an office, a divine function, and Hatshepsut inhabits it completely. Her reign unfolds not through conquest, but through construction, trade, and theological legitimacy. She commissions a birth narrative carved into temple walls at Deir el-Bahari, depicting the god Amun himself selecting her mother Ahmose and fathering the future king. Divine parentage silences political objection. The priesthood of Amun at Karnak, already the wealthiest institution in Egypt, supports her claim. In return, she lavishes resources upon the temple complex, erecting 2 towering obelisks of red granite quarried at Aswan, each standing nearly 30 meters tall, their tips sheathed in electrum that catches the Theban sun. The mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari remains her supreme architectural achievement. Designed by her chief steward and architect Senenmut, the structure rises in 3 colonnaded terraces against the sheer limestone cliffs of western Thebes. Ramps connect each level. Painted reliefs in vivid ochre, blue, and green line the porticos. The temple harmonizes with the natural rock face behind it, a marriage of human ambition and geological grandeur that no subsequent builder in the valley surpasses. Around 1470 before the Common Era, Hatshepsut dispatches 5 ships south along the Red Sea coast to the land of Punt, a semi-legendary trading partner whose exact location scholars still debate, likely along the coast of modern Eritrea or Somalia. The expedition returns laden with living myrrh trees carried in baskets of earth, ebony logs, gold rings, cinnamon, incense resin heaped in mounds, ivory, and exotic animals including baboons and a giraffe. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari record the voyage in extraordinary detail, depicting Punt's stilt houses, its lush vegetation, its people and their queen, rendered with an ethnographic specificity rare in Egyptian art. Egypt prospers. Copper mines in Sinai operate at full capacity. Trade routes into Nubia flow with gold. Quarrying expeditions supply stone for temples at Karnak, Luxor, Buhan, and Paket's rock-cut shrine at Beni Hassan. Senenmut oversees much of this building program, accumulating titles and privileges unprecedented for a non-royal official, including a tomb aligned beneath the outer court of the queen's own mortuary temple. Hatshepsut rules for approximately 21 years. When she dies, around 1458 before the Common Era, Thutmose III at last assumes sole power. He is no longer a boy but a man in his 30s, trained in military command, impatient for campaigns his stepmother never pursued. Within years, perhaps decades, a systematic program of erasure begins. Hatshepsut's cartouches are chiseled from temple walls. Her Osiride statues at Deir el-Bahari are toppled and buried in a quarry pit. Her obelisks at Karnak are walled behind masonry, hidden but not destroyed. The erasure is selective and deliberate, targeting her kingship rather than her existence, likely motivated by dynastic legitimacy rather than personal hatred, ensuring the succession line reads cleanly from Thutmose II to Thutmose III without interruption. Yet stone remembers what politics tries to forget. The chisel marks themselves testify to what was removed. The buried statues survived intact for 34 centuries. The colonnaded terraces at Deir el-Bahari still rise against the cliffs, and the Punt reliefs still display their cargo of myrrh and wonder. Hatshepsut built for eternity, and eternity, despite every effort to deny it, has kept its promise. The erasure complete, the man who ordered it steps into full sunlight. Thutmose III, no longer a boy kept from power, no longer a co-regent overshadowed by a woman who wore the double crown, emerges at roughly 30 years of age as sole pharaoh of the 2 lands. He inherits a wealthy, stable kingdom, but the Levantine vassal states, sensing years of Egyptian passivity under Hatshepsut's peaceful reign, have begun to slip from the imperial orbit. A coalition gathers around the Prince of Kadesh, centered on the fortified city of Megiddo, where the Jezreel Valley opens onto the coastal trade routes that connect Egypt to Mesopotamia. In the 22nd year of his reign, around 1457 before the Common Era, Thutmose marches an army of perhaps 10,000 soldiers northward through Gaza and into the hill country. His war council urges the safer flanking routes around the Carmel Ridge, but the pharaoh chooses the narrow Aruna Pass, a single-file defile where an ambush could destroy the entire force. The gamble succeeds. Egyptian chariots pour onto the Megiddo plain before the coalition can regroup. The enemy scatters toward the city walls, and defenders haul their allies up by ropes and clothing. A prolonged siege follows, lasting 7 months until Megiddo surrenders. The annals carved later on the walls of Karnak record the plunder with bureaucratic precision. 924 chariots, 2,038 horses, 200 suits of armor, vast quantities of gold, silver, and grain. Megiddo is only the beginning. Over the next 18 years, Thutmose launches at least 17 campaigns into the Levant and beyond. He crosses the Euphrates River on his 8th campaign, erecting a victory stela beside that of his grandfather Thutmose I. He fights the kingdom of Mitanni on its own territory, hunts elephants near Nia in modern Syria, and systematically reduces every fortress that resists. Vassal princes send their sons to be educated at the Egyptian court, ensuring loyalty through cultural assimilation. Tribute flows southward in staggering volume. Cedar logs from Byblos, copper from Cyprus, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan passed through intermediary hands, horses from the northern plains. Simultaneously, Egyptian power extends deep into Nubia, past the 4th cataract of the Nile, securing gold mines that finance the entire imperial apparatus. The empire at its zenith stretches across roughly 1 million square kilometers, the largest territorial state the world has yet seen. The wealth transforms Thebes. At Karnak, Thutmose constructs the festival hall known as the Akhmenu, a structure unlike any Egyptian building before it. Its columns are shaped like tent poles, their capitals flaring outward, deliberately evoking the military pavilion of a campaigning king. On the walls of a small chamber within this hall, artisans carve an astonishing botanical and zoological catalogue. Plants, birds, and animals collected from foreign lands during the Syrian campaigns. Pomegranates, irises, and species never before seen in the Nile Valley appear in careful stone relief, an empirical record of the natural world rendered with scientific curiosity 3,000 years before Linnaeus. The annals themselves represent a revolution in royal documentation. Earlier pharaohs boasted in vague terms of smiting enemies. Thutmose III provides dates, troop movements, garrison placements, and itemized inventories. His military scribe, Giannani, accompanies the campaigns and records events on leather scrolls, later transferred to Karnak's stone walls. These texts constitute the most detailed military records surviving from the ancient world before the Assyrian Empire. By the time of his death around 1425, before the Common Era, after a reign of nearly 54 years, Thutmose III has redefined what pharaonic power means. Egypt is no longer a river kingdom content with its own borders. It is an empire, its diplomacy conducted in Akkadian cuneiform on clay tablets, its garrisons stationed from the Nile Delta to the banks of the Euphrates. The boy who once watched Hatshepsut rule from behind a ceremonial screen has become the architect of the greatest military expansion Egypt will ever know, his campaign studied by strategists for millennia after the last chariot wheel crumbles to dust. A century after the great conqueror's death, the empire he forged hums with wealth almost beyond comprehension. Gold flows from Nubian mines, tribute caravans arrive from Syria and Palestine, and the Amun priesthood at Karnak has grown into an institution rivaling the throne itself. Temple estates control vast tracts of farmland, thousands of laborers, and herds beyond counting. The god Amun, once a minor Theban deity, now commands resources that make his clergy kingmakers. It is into this tension between palace and temple that Amenhotep IV ascends around 1353 before the Common Era, and within a handful of years he will attempt to dismantle a religious order older than living memory. The early reign offers hints rather than declarations. The young pharaoh commissions a temple to the Aten, the visible sun disk, within the sacred precinct of Karnak itself, a provocation built in the shadow of Amun's own sanctuary. The structure uses smaller stone blocks called talatat, each light enough for a single man to carry, allowing construction at extraordinary speed. The carved reliefs already look different. The king's body appears elongated, his jaw stretched forward, his hips wide, his limbs thin. Whether this reflects a medical condition, a theological statement about transcending human form, or a deliberate artistic manifesto remains debated. But the departure from centuries of idealized royal portraiture is unmistakable. By roughly his 5th regnal year, the transformation accelerates beyond anything the two lands have witnessed. Amenhotep IV changes his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, severing his identity from Amun entirely. He orders construction of a new capital on virgin ground, a desert plain in Middle Egypt, where the cliffs form a natural amphitheater open to the rising sun. He names it Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. 14 boundary stelae carved into the surrounding cliffs define the city's sacred limits and record the king's oath never to expand beyond them. The city rises from nothing, open-air temples without roofs, because the Aten requires no enclosed sanctuary, royal palaces connected by a bridge spanning the central road, administrative buildings, workers' villages, and sprawling residential quarters. The Queen Nefertiti stands at the center of this revolution. Her painted limestone bust, discovered at Amarna in 1912 by a German excavation team, reveals a face of extraordinary symmetry beneath a tall blue crown. Temple reliefs show her performing rituals traditionally reserved for pharaohs alone, smiting enemies, making offerings directly to the Aten. The sun disk hovers above the royal family in scene after scene, its rays ending in small human hands that extend the Ankh, the sign of life, to the king and queen exclusively. No other gods appear. No Osiris, no Isis, no Horus, no Thoth. The entire pantheon that sustained Egyptian civilization for nearly 2,000 years is simply absent. Meanwhile, the diplomatic archive known as the Amarna Letters, over 300 clay tablets inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, reveals a world growing anxious. Vassal kings in Canaan and Syria write desperately to the Egyptian court, pleading for military assistance against encroaching enemies. Many letters go unanswered. The empire Thutmose III, built through relentless campaigning, begins fraying at its edges, while the pharaoh focuses inward on theological transformation. Akhenaten dies around 1336 before the Common Era, and the dream dies with him. Within a generation, the court abandons Akhetaten entirely. Sand drifts through roofless temples. The talatat blocks at Karnak are dismantled and buried as fill inside later pylons, preserving them accidentally for archaeologists millennia later. The king's name is chiseled from monuments, his image destroyed, his reign omitted from official king lists. The priests of Amun reclaim their authority with a thoroughness that borders on erasure. Yet the buried city at Amarna, sealed beneath desert sand, preserves the most complete snapshot of an ancient Egyptian urban plan ever discovered. A ghost capital where one pharaoh tried to remake the cosmos, and the cosmos refused. The boy who inherits the wreckage is perhaps 9 years old. Tutankhaten, his birth name still carries the Aten syllable, ascends the throne around 1336 before the Common Era, a child pharaoh guided by hands far steadier and more calculating than his own. The two most powerful figures flanking the throne are I, an elderly courtier who may be the boy's grandfather, and Horemheb, the commander-in-chief of Egypt's armies. Between them, they orchestrate the most comprehensive theological reversal the two lands have ever witnessed. The court abandons Amarna. The capital shifts back to Memphis for administration and to Thebes for religious ceremony. Within the first years of the reign, the young king changes his name to Tutankhamun, replacing the Aten with Amun in a single syllable that signals the restoration of everything his predecessor dismantled. A large stela erected at Karnak, the restoration stela, declares that the temples had fallen into ruin, that the gods had turned their backs on Egypt, that prayers went unanswered. The inscription attributes the renewal of divine order to the young pharaoh, though the words almost certainly flow from A's political mind. Karnak's workshops roar back to life. New cult statues of Amun are carved from the finest stone. Gold stripped from Aten temples is recast into sacred barks and shrine fittings. The priesthood of Amun, humiliated under Akhenaten, reclaims its estates, its granaries, its enormous economic power. Thebes breathes again as the religious heart of the empire. Tutankhamun himself remains largely a ceremonial figure. His slight frame, revealed by modern computed tomography scans, shows a young man afflicted with a clubbed left foot, a bone disease likely inherited from generations of royal intermarriage. He walks with canes. Over 130 walking sticks are later found among his burial goods. Yet painted scenes on a gilded shrine from his tomb depict intimate moments with his queen, Ankhesenamun, herself a daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Two stillborn daughters, their tiny mummified bodies placed in his tomb, speak to a dynasty struggling to produce an heir. Death comes around 1323 before the Common Era, when Tutankhamun is approximately 19. The cause remains debated, a fractured leg complicated by malaria, genetic fragility, or some combination. His burial in tomb KV 62 in the Valley of the Kings is hurried. The tomb is small, likely not originally intended for a pharaoh. 4 gilded wooden shrines nest one inside another, enclosing a quartzite sarcophagus, which holds 3 nested coffins. The innermost coffin, crafted from approximately 110 kilograms of solid gold, cradles the mummy. Over the face rests the iconic death mask, 11 kilograms of gold inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, obsidian, and turquoise, its serene expression frozen for 33 centuries. More than 5,000 artifacts fill the 4 small chambers, chariots dismantled to fit through the doorway, gilded couches shaped as sacred animals, alabaster canopic jars guarding the king's preserved organs, faience jewelry, linen garments, food offerings, board games, and weapons. It is the most complete royal burial ever discovered intact, unearthed by Howard Carter in 1922. After Tutankhamun, A seizes the throne briefly, reigning perhaps 4 years. Then Horemheb the general claims kingship with no royal blood at all. His reign of roughly 27 years is defined by systematic erasure. He dismantles Akhenaten's remaining monuments, usurps Tutankhamun's own restoration stela by carving his name over the boy kings, and purges Amarna period rulers from official records. On the king lists carved by later pharaohs, the sequence jumps from Amenhotep III directly to Horemheb, as though the heresy and its aftermath never occurred. Horemheb, childless himself, appoints his trusted vizier, a military man from the eastern delta named Paramessu, as heir. This elderly soldier takes the throne around 1295 before the Common Era as Ramesses I, founding the 19th dynasty. His reign lasts barely 2 years, but his son Seti and his grandson Ramesses will reshape Egypt on a scale not seen since the pyramid builders. The golden boy's forgotten tomb sleeps undisturbed beneath the valley floor, waiting. Seti I, the warrior who reconquered Kadesh and carved exquisite reliefs at Abydos, rules for perhaps 15 years before his son inherits the double crown around 1279 before the Common Era. Ramesses II ascends in his early 20s, already battle-tested, already co-regent, already father to several children. He will outlive most of them. His reign stretches 67 years, the longest confirmed rule in Egyptian history, and by its end the young prince who rode chariots beside his father will be a stooped elder in his 90s, worshipped as a living god. The defining military moment arrives early. In his 5th regnal year, Ramesses marches north with 4 divisions, Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth, totaling perhaps 20,000 men, to reclaim Kadesh on the Orontes River from the Hittite king Muwatalli II. Hittite scouts, disguised as deserters, feed false intelligence to Egyptian officers, and the trap closes with devastating precision. The Ra division is shattered on the march. Ramesses, isolated with only his household guard and the Amun division, faces nearly 2,500 Hittite chariots. The pharaoh fights his way out. This much the Egyptian and Hittite sources both confirm, but Kadesh remains in Hittite hands. The battle is, at best, a tactical draw. Yet on temple walls from Karnak to Abu Simbel, the narrative transforms into total victory. Enormous reliefs depict Ramesses single-handedly routing the enemy, his war chariot crushing fallen Hittites beneath its wheels. These carved accounts represent the most extensively documented military engagement of the ancient world, covering hundreds of square meters of sacred stone. 15 years of intermittent border skirmishing follow before pragmatism prevails. Around 1259 before the Common Era, Ramesses and the Hittite king Hattusili III seal a formal peace treaty, the earliest known international agreement to survive in both parties' versions, one in Egyptian hieroglyphs, one in Akkadian cuneiform. Its clauses address mutual non-aggression, extradition of fugitives, and defensive alliance against third-party attack. A copy now hangs in the United Nations headquarters as a symbol of diplomatic precedent. With the northern frontier stabilized, Ramesses turns to construction on a scale Egypt has not witnessed since the Pyramid Age. In the eastern delta, he builds Pi-Ramesses, a sprawling capital covering perhaps 15 square kilometers, its palace floors paved with glazed faience tiles depicting bound captives and lotus pools. Workshops produce bronze weapons, glass vessels, and linen in industrial quantities. The city gleams with painted temples and tree-lined canals fed by the Nile's Pelusiac branch. Far to the south, At the second cataract frontier in Nubia, 4 colossal seated figures of Ramesses rise 20 meters from the sandstone cliff face at Abu Simbel. Each weighs over 1,000 tons. The temple's axis aligned so precisely that twice each year, around the 22nd of February and the 22nd of October, the rising sun penetrates 60 meters of corridor to illuminate 3 of the 4 seated gods in the innermost sanctuary. The 4th figure, Ptah, lord of the underworld, remains perpetually in shadow. Ramesses fathers over 100 children by his many wives, among them the great royal wife Nefertari, whose own small temple stands beside his at Abu Simbel. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens contained some of the finest painted plaster ever applied to stone. Cobalt blues, vermilion reds, and gold leaf depicting the Queen's journey through the afterlife. Decade follows decade. Ramesses buries sons, buries wives, buries rivals. He celebrates an unprecedented 14 said festivals, each meant to ritually renew his strength. His mummy, recovered from the Deir el-Bahari cache in 1881, reveals a tall frame ravaged by arthritis, dental abscesses, and hardened arteries. He dies around 1213 before the Common Era, and the empire he adorned with his name, carved on nearly every monument from the Delta to deep Nubia, begins an imperceptible slide toward twilight. The twilight Ramesses leaves behind settles not upon empty sand, but upon stone forests raised to outlast every pharaoh who commissioned them. Along the east bank of the Nile at Thebes, the temple complex of Karnak sprawls across more than 200 acres, the largest religious site the ancient world ever produced. Its construction spans nearly 2,000 years, but the centuries between 1400 and 1100 before the Common Era witness its most staggering transformation. What stands here is not merely a temple. It is a theology made physical, a machine designed to sustain the cosmic order called Maat. The great hypostyle hall dominates Karnak's central axis. 134 sandstone columns rise within a space covering 5,000 square meters. The 12 columns lining the processional nave soar 23 meters, their open papyrus capitals wide enough for 100 men to stand upon. The remaining 122 columns, slightly shorter with closed bud capitals, crowd together so densely that the gaps between them admit only narrow blades of light. Every surface carries carved and painted relief, gods embracing pharaohs, ritual offerings enumerated in meticulous hieroglyphic lists, battle scenes commemorating campaigns already fading from living memory. Traces of original polychrome cling to sheltered surfaces. Deep lapis blue skies, ochre-skinned deities, white linen garments edged in red. Seti I began this hall, Ramesses II completed it. Together they created a space meant to evoke the primordial marsh from which creation itself emerged. South from Karnak, a processional avenue lined with sphinx statues stretches nearly 3 kilometers to Luxor Temple. This corridor of carved sandstone guardians, ram-headed sphinxes near Karnak, giving way to human-headed forms approaching Luxor, serves as the sacred road for the annual Opet festival. During this celebration, lasting between 11 and 27 days depending on the era, priests carry the gilded bark shrine of Amun from Karnak to Luxor Temple in solemn procession. Musicians, dancers, acrobats, and chanting clergy accompany the god's journey. At Luxor, the divine essence of Amun merges with the royal Ka, ritually renewing the pharaoh's legitimacy to rule. The festival binds king and god in a covenant visible to every citizen lining the route. Across the river on the west bank, Medinet Habu rises as the mortuary temple of Ramesses III. Its massive fortified gateway, modelled on Syrian Migdol towers, frames walls covered in reliefs depicting the defeat of the Sea Peoples and Libyan invaders. Within, columned courts and dim sanctuaries replicate the cosmic architecture found at Karnak, an outer zone of public access, giving way to increasingly restricted inner chambers until the innermost sanctuary, where only the high priest enters, houses the god's cult statue in perpetual darkness. These temples function as far more than houses of prayer. They are economic engines. Karnak alone administers vast agricultural estates, cattle herds numbering in the tens of thousands, workshops producing linen and bread, and granaries feeding thousands of temple employees. Priestly hierarchies manage these holdings with bureaucratic precision, recorded on papyrus inventories. The Temple of Amun at Karnak eventually controls roughly a third of all cultivable land in Egypt, making its priesthood a political force capable of rivaling the throne itself. Inside every sanctuary, the daily ritual follows an unchanging pattern. At dawn, a priest breaks the clay seal on the shrine door, reveals the god's statue, anoints it with sacred oils, dresses it in fresh linen, and presents offerings of bread, beer, meat, and flowers. Incense smoke, kifi blended from frankincense, myrrh, and 16 ingredients, fills the torchlit chamber. The god consumes the spiritual essence. The physical food later feeds the priests. This cycle repeats without interruption, sustaining the divine presence that Egyptians believe holds chaos at bay. Stone by stone, column by column, these monuments encode an entire civilization's understanding of existence. They are calendars, libraries, treasuries, and cosmic anchors simultaneously. Even as the political order frays in the centuries ahead, the temples endure, their rituals continuing long after the empire that raised them begins to fracture. West of Thebes, beyond the cultivated floodplain and past the mortuary temples lining the desert edge, a dry limestone valley cuts into the hills. Its Arabic name, Biban el-Muluk, means the gates of the kings. For nearly 5 centuries, from the reign of Thutmose I around 1500 before the Common Era to the last Ramesside pharaohs near 1070, this desolate wadi serves as the most sacred burial ground in the ancient world. 63 tombs will eventually honeycomb its cliffs, though many remain hidden beneath rubble for millennia. The choice of location is deliberate. A natural pyramid-shaped peak called El Khorn dominates the skyline, echoing the royal monuments at Giza without requiring millions of limestone blocks. The valley's single narrow entrance allows a dedicated police force, the Medjay, to patrol access. Unlike the conspicuous pyramids that tomb robbers plundered within generations, these burials hide underground, their entrances sealed with rubble and plastered over. A royal tomb descends through a series of corridors and stairways, sometimes dropping 30 meters into bedrock. The walls transform into illuminated manuscripts. Every surface carries painted scenes from funerary texts, the Amduat, which maps the sun god's 12-hour journey through the underworld, the Book of Gates with its guardian serpents, and the Book of the Dead, whose 192 spells guide the deceased past every peril. Pigments ground from ochre, carbon, malachite, and Egyptian blue remain vivid against white plaster. The burial chamber ceiling often glows deep blue, spangled with golden stars representing the body of the sky goddess Nut. At the heart of each tomb rests the sarcophagus, carved from quartzite or granite, sometimes nested inside 3 or 4 gilded wooden shrines. Surrounding it stand canopic jars, 4 vessels with lids shaped as the sons of Horus, holding the preserved liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Golden amulets tucked between layers of linen wrapping protect the mummy at every joint and organ. The heart scarab, placed over the chest, bears a spell imploring the heart not to testify against its owner during judgment. That judgment scene, the weighing of the heart, appears in nearly every royal and noble tomb. The jackal-headed Anubis balances the deceased's heart against the feather of Maat, goddess of truth. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, records the verdict. If the heart proves lighter than the feather, the soul passes into the field of reeds, an eternal paradise mirroring the Nile Valley in perpetual harvest. If heavier, the devourer Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, consumes it, erasing the soul from existence. The mummification process enabling this passage spans 70 days. Embalmers working in temporary riverside workshops first extract the brain through the nasal passages using a hooked bronze instrument, then remove the internal organs through an incision in the left flank. The body rests in natron salt for 40 days, desiccating completely. Afterward, embalmers pack the cavities with linen and resin, anoint the skin with oils, and begin the meticulous wrapping, up to 400 square meters of linen strips for a single mummy, each layer brushed with warm resin. The largest tomb in the valley, designated by modern archaeologists as the 5th in the sequence, belongs not to a single king, but to the sons of Ramesses II. Over 120 chambers branch from its corridors, a subterranean palace for the dozens of princes who predeceased their long-lived father. Its sheer scale reveals the logistical ambition of New Kingdom mortuary planning. Yet despite every precaution, almost every tomb suffers robbery. Judicial papyri from the reign of Ramesses IX record trials of thieves who confessed under beating to stripping gold from royal mummies and melting it down. Priests of the 21st dynasty eventually gather the violated mummies and rewrap them, caching dozens of kings in 2 hidden deposits where they lie undisturbed until the 19th century of the Common Era. The painted corridors fall silent, sealed beneath flood debris and centuries of forgetting, preserving in darkness the most elaborate vision of eternity any civilization has ever committed to stone. While kings sleep in painted corridors beneath the Theban hills, the civilization that carved those tombs breathes through humbler rhythms, the creak of a shadoof lifting water, the slap of wet linen on stone, the low hum of grain being ground between saddle querns at dawn. The New Kingdom's grandeur rests not on pharaohs alone, but on millions of lives shaped by the Nile's annual pulse. Each year around late June, floodwaters begin their slow rise, fed by monsoon rains thousands of kilometers south in the Ethiopian highlands. By August, the inundation, called Akhet, spreads across the valley floor, depositing the rich black silt that gives Egypt its ancient name, Kemet, the Black Land. Farmers cannot work submerged fields, so the state conscripts them for temple construction or canal maintenance. When the waters recede in October, the season of Péré begins. Ploughmen drive wooden ploughs tipped with bronze behind teams of oxen, turning the soft mud. Emmer wheat and barley seed is scattered and trampled in by goats and sheep. 4 months later, Shemu brings harvest under a blazing sky, sickles flashing through golden stalks, grain threshed by donkeys walking circles on packed earth. Diet follows the river's generosity. Bread and beer form the twin staples, both derived from grain. Coarse barley loaves baked in conical clay molds appear in every household. Beer, lightly fermented and thick with sediment, serves as daily nourishment rather than luxury. Onions, garlic, lentils, and lettuce supplement meals. Fish from the Nile, tilapia, mullet, perch, are split and dried on racks in the sun. Wealthier families enjoy roasted goose, pomegranates, figs, and honey. Housing across the valley follows a common pattern. Mud brick walls rise from narrow foundations, roofed with palm logs overlaid with bundled reeds and plastered mud. Most homes contain 4 to 6 rooms arranged around a central living space, with a low brick platform for sitting and sleeping. Kitchens occupy rear courtyards where cylindrical ovens radiate heat. Stairs lead to flat rooftops where families sleep during the hottest months. Walls receive whitewash inside and out, sometimes painted with protective images of the household god Bez, the dwarf deity who guards mothers and children. Nowhere is daily life better documented than at Deir el-Medina, the walled village tucked in a desert valley west of Thebes. Here approximately 120 families of skilled artisans, stonecutters, painters, plasterers, draftsmen live in terraced houses lining a single central street. The state pays them in grain rations, supplemented by fish, vegetables, and occasional distributions of meat and wine. Ostraca, limestone flakes, and pottery shards used as cheap writing surfaces survive by the thousands, recording laundry lists, love poems, medical prescriptions, attendance registers, noting when workers miss shifts due to illness, scorpion bites, or brewing beer for personal use. Family life centers on the household. Marriage requires no religious ceremony but involves economic agreements about property. Women hold legal rights to own land, initiate divorce, and conduct business. Children play with leather balls, carved wooden animals, and spinning tops found in excavated homes. Linen production occupies much domestic labor. Flax is harvested, retted, spun on hand spindles, and woven on horizontal looms into fabric, ranging from coarse workwear to gossamer fine royal garments. The community at Deir el-Medina also produces the earliest known record of organized labor action. Around 1152 before the Common Era, during the 29th year of Ramesses III's reign, grain rations fail to arrive. Workers down tools and march to the mortuary temples, refusing to return until payment comes. Scribes document the event on papyrus, a strike born not of ideology, but of empty granaries, a crack in the system that foreshadows deeper fractures ahead. Yet for now the village endures, its painted walls bright against the desert, its children chasing each other down the narrow street, while their parents shape eternity underground. Beyond the village walls of Deir el-Medina, beyond the rhythms of flood and harvest, a quieter architecture sustains the empire, the architecture of knowledge itself. Fewer than 5 in every 100 Egyptians can read, yet this slender literate class administers a civilization stretching from the 4th cataract of the Nile to the banks of the Euphrates. Their tool is deceptively simple: a reed pen, cut from the juncus plant, its tip bruised into fibers that hold ink made from carbon soot mixed with gum arabic. Red ochre ink marks corrections and headings. Black ink carries the body of every text. These two colors organize an entire world. Scribal training begins young, often around age 5, in temple or palace schools called houses of life. Students copy moral maxims and administrative formulas onto limestone flakes and broken pottery, ostraca, because papyrus is too costly for practice. Years pass before a student earns the right to unroll a fresh sheet of papyrus, its surface made from layered strips of the cyperus plant, hammered and dried into smooth writing material. The curriculum includes hieratic script for daily business, classical literature for moral formation, and mathematics sufficient to calculate grain volumes and land boundaries after each inundation. Yet the houses of life produce more than bureaucrats. They shelter Egypt's medical tradition, a body of empirical knowledge remarkable for its era. The Edwin Smith papyrus, likely copied during the New Kingdom from an original composed centuries earlier, catalogues 48 surgical cases organized from head downward through the body. Each entry follows a strict format: title, examination, diagnosis, and verdict, classifying injuries as treatable, contestable, or beyond help. Skull fractures, dislocated jaws, and spinal injuries receive clinical descriptions free of magical invocation. The Ebers Papyrus, dating to roughly 1450 before the Common Era, takes a broader approach, listing some 700 remedies drawn from minerals, plants, and animal substances. Honey appears repeatedly as a wound dressing, a practice modern science validates for its antibacterial properties. Surgeons work with copper needles, obsidian blades, and linen swabs, their instruments laid out on clean surfaces with a precision that anticipates later Hippocratic method. From healing the body, the same institutional framework turns to adorning it and furnishing the afterlife. Goldsmiths in Theban workshops hammer electrum and pure gold into pectoral ornaments using cloisonne technique. Thin metal walls soldered onto a base plate, each cell filled with cut pieces of carnelian, turquoise, and lapis lazuli imported from as far as Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan. The pectoral of Princess Mereret from the Middle Kingdom establishes a template that New Kingdom artisans refine to breathtaking intricacy. Faience workshops fire crushed quartz mixed with natron and copper oxide into a self-glazing ceramic that emerges from the kiln in vivid turquoise blue. Ushabti figurines, servant statues meant to labor in the afterlife on behalf of the deceased, roll from molds by the hundreds, each inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead. Glassmaking, mastered by the mid-18th dynasty, produces small vessels of swirling color, core-formed around a clay shape and trailed with molten threads of white, yellow, and cobalt. On the Nile itself, shipwrights at the royal dockyards of Peru-Nefer near Memphis construct cedarwood barks imported from Byblos. Planks are joined edge to edge with mortise and tenon joints, lashed internally with rope and sealed with pitch. These vessels carry obelisks weighing hundreds of tons downstream from Aswan quarries and transport armies across the eastern Mediterranean. Every craft feeds every other. The scribe records the goldsmith's inventory. The physician treats the shipwright's injuries. The faience maker supplies amulets the embalmer tucks between linen wrappings. Knowledge circulates not through abstract theory, but through apprenticeship, temple libraries, and the endless copying of texts whose authority grows with each generation. It is a system built to preserve rather than to innovate, yet within its conservative framework, refinements accumulate across centuries, surgical technique growing surer, glazes growing brighter, gold joints growing finer, until the products of new kingdom workshops achieve a technical mastery that will not be equaled in the Mediterranean world for another 1,000 years. That technical mastery, refined across centuries of patient apprenticeship, now faces a threat no workshop can answer. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the Eastern Mediterranean begins to unravel. The Hittite Empire, Egypt's great rival and treaty partner since the days of Ramesses II, disintegrates. Ugarit, the cosmopolitan port on the Syrian coast, whose scribes wrote in 7 languages, burns to the ground and is never rebuilt. Mycenaean palace centers across Greece collapse one after another. Cyprus falls silent. Trade routes that once carried Cypriot copper, Lebanese cedar, Aegean olive oil, and Egyptian gold fracture beyond repair. The interconnected Bronze Age world, dependent on long-distance exchange for the tin and copper that forge its weapons and tools, shatters like a vessel dropped on stone. From the chaos emerges a coalition of migrating peoples whose origins remain debated by scholars to this day. Egyptian records call them simply the foreign countries, the peoples of the sea. Among them are the Peleset, who will settle the southern Levantine coast and give their name to Palestine. The Cheka, the Shekelesh, the Denien, the Weshesh, names preserved on temple walls at Medinet Habu, the great mortuary complex of Ramesses III on the west bank of Thebes. These groups move not as raiding parties alone, but as entire populations, ox carts carrying women and children alongside warriors, armed with long swords and round shields, unfamiliar to Egyptian soldiers. Ramesses III, second pharaoh of the 20th dynasty, meets the crisis with decisive force. Around 1178, before the Common Era, his forces engaged the Sea Peoples in a coordinated land and naval battle near the mouths of the Nile. The reliefs at Medinet Habu depict the scene in extraordinary detail. Egyptian archers on shore raining arrows into enemy vessels, grappling hooks pulling foreign ships close, warriors tumbling into the water as their craft capsize. Egyptian galleys with their banks of oars outmaneuver the sailing ships of the invaders. The victory is total. Captives are marched south in bound columns, their feathered headdresses and horned helmets carved with precision into the sandstone walls. Yet victory does not restore the old order. The international trade networks that sustained Egyptian prosperity are gone. Copper and tin grow scarce. Grain shipments falter. Within decades of the battle, the workers of Deir el-Medina, the very artisans who carve royal tombs, stage a labor strike around 1152 before the Common Era under Ramesses III, because their monthly grain rations have stopped arriving. It is the earliest recorded strike in history, documented on papyrus, not an act of rebellion, but of desperation from men whose state can no longer feed them. Ramesses III himself falls to enemies closer than any foreign coalition. Around 1155, before the Common Era, a harem conspiracy orchestrated by a secondary queen named Tiye succeeds in assassinating the pharaoh. Judicial papyri record the subsequent trials in meticulous bureaucratic detail, listing the accused, their punishments, the magical wax figurines used in the plot. A computed tomography scan of the royal mummy in the 21st century reveals a deep knife wound across the throat, confirming the ancient texts. After his death, a succession of kings all bearing the name Ramesses follows, the 4th through the 11th, each weaker than the last. State revenues shrink. Tomb robberies become epidemic in the Theban necropolis, and surviving judicial papyri from the reign of Ramesses the Ninth document trials of thieves who broke into royal burials, melted down golden coffins, and stripped mummies of their amulets. Priests of Amun eventually resort to secretly relocating royal mummies to hidden caches in the cliffs, bundling the great pharaohs of earlier dynasties into unmarked corridors to save them from further desecration. By 1070 before the Common Era, the new kingdom exhales its final breath. The last Ramesses surrenders effective power, and Egypt splits, a dynasty of pharaohs ruling from Tanis in the delta, a line of high priests of Amun governing Thebes. The empire that once stretched from the Fourth Cataract to the Euphrates contracts to the narrow ribbon of the Nile itself. Granaries stand empty. Temple workshops fall quiet. The age of monumental building fades into memory, and the long, slow fracture of centralized authority begins. The fracture deepens. Two Egypts now exist where one once stood, and the seam between them runs roughly where the delta fans outward from the narrow valley. In the north, at Tanis, a city built partly from dismantled monuments of Ramesses, a new dynasty of pharaohs claims legitimacy through royal titulary and temple construction. Smendes I establishes his court among reused obelisks and repurposed colossi, governing the fertile delta, while trade with the Levant sputters back to life through Mediterranean ports. In the south, the high priests of Amun at Thebes wield authority that is pharaonic in all but name. They command temple estates, control granary revenues, and consult the oracle of Amun at Karnak to legitimize political decisions. The god himself, carried in his gilded bark during festival processions, effectively rules Upper Egypt through priestly intermediaries. This dual arrangement persists for generations, neither side strong enough to absorb the other. At Tanis, royal burials reveal a kingdom that still aspires to grandeur. Tombs discovered in 1939 by Pierre Montet yield silver coffins, gold funerary masks, and pectorals inlaid with lapis lazuli and carnelian, treasures rivaling Tutankhamun's, yet fashioned from silver rather than gold, reflecting shifted trade routes and diminished access to Nubian mines. Susenes I rests inside a pink granite sarcophagus originally carved for a 19th dynasty courtier, repurposed with fresh inscriptions. Recycling the past becomes a defining practice of this era. Into this divided landscape arrive the Meshwesh, Libyan tribal leaders who have settled in the western delta over generations as soldiers and landholders. Around 945 before the Common Era, a Libyan chieftain named Shoshenq ascends the throne as founder of the 22nd dynasty. He reunifies the two lands not through conquest, but through strategic appointment, installing his son as high priest of Amun at Thebes. Shoshenq I then turns outward. Around 925 before the Common Era, he launches a military campaign into the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, sacking towns across the Levantine highlands. A massive relief at Karnak's Bubastite portal records the names of captured cities, and the Hebrew Bible preserves his memory as Shishak, the pharaoh who plundered Jerusalem's temple treasures. Yet Libyan unity proves fragile. Within a century, rival Libyan dynasts splinter the delta into competing fiefdoms. The 23rd and 24th dynasties rule simultaneously from different cities, Leontopolis, Hermopolis, Sais, each claiming pharaonic authority while controlling only local territories. Egypt resembles a patchwork of petty kingdoms, its once centralized administration dissolved into regional lordships. From the deep south, a power watches. The kingdom of Kush, centered at Napata near the Fourth Cataract, has absorbed centuries of Egyptian cultural influence, worshipping Amun, building small, steep-sided pyramids at El Kuru, writing in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Around 727 before the Common Era, the Kushite king Piye marches north with a disciplined army. City after city submits. Piye's great victory stela, discovered at Gebel Barkal, records his methodical conquest and his devotion to Amun. He purifies himself before entering each temple, horrified by the neglect he finds. He claims the double crown, then returns south, leaving Egypt nominally unified under Nubian sovereignty. His successor Taharqa transforms this claim into monumental reality. Ruling both Egypt and Nubia simultaneously, Taharqa builds on a scale unseen for centuries. At Karnak, he erects a colonnade of towering columns in the first court. At Gebel Barkal, he expands the temple of Amun. Nubian pyramids multiply at Nuri and El Kuru, their steep angles distinct from the broad profiles of Giza. For a brief generation, the 25th dynasty restores something resembling imperial dignity, reviving Old Kingdom artistic conventions and archaizing religious texts as deliberate acts of cultural renewal. But the Assyrian Empire, then at its zenith under Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, views Egypt as unfinished business. In 671 before the Common Era, Assyrian armies sack Thebes itself, a catastrophe so profound that the Hebrew prophet Nahum later invokes it as a measure of divine destruction. Taharqa retreats south. The Nubian dynasty withdraws permanently beyond the cataracts, and Egypt passes into yet another set of foreign hands, its throne now a prize contested by empires far larger than itself. From the ashes of Assyrian occupation, a new dynasty rises in the western delta city of Sais. Psamtik I, originally installed as a vassal governor by Assyria, exploits the empire's overextension to consolidate independent rule by 664 before the Common Era. His method is pragmatic and unprecedented. He recruits Greek hoplites from Ionia and Carian warriors from southwestern Anatolia, professional soldiers whose bronze armor and disciplined phalanx formations give him military superiority over rival delta lords. These foreign mercenaries garrison strategic positions along the Nile, and their presence marks a permanent shift. Egypt, for the first time, depends on outsiders to defend its sovereignty. Yet the site renaissance that follows is anything but foreign in spirit. Psamtik and his successors of the 26th dynasty launch a deliberate program of cultural restoration, reaching back 2,000 years to the Old Kingdom for artistic models. Sculptors carve statues in hard stone with the serene, idealized faces of the Pyramid Age, replicating proportions and poses that had fallen from fashion centuries earlier. Temple scribes copy ancient religious texts with meticulous care, preserving rituals whose spoken language already sounds archaic. The past becomes a conscious instrument of legitimacy, a declaration that native rule connects to the deepest roots of Egyptian civilization. At Abu Simbel, Greek mercenaries serving Psamtik II scratch their names into the legs of Ramesses II's colossal statues around 591 before the Common Era. Casual graffiti that survives as some of the oldest Greek inscriptions found outside Greece itself. The cultural exchange runs deeper than vandalism. Egyptian ports along the Mediterranean welcome Greek traders, and the city of Naucratis in the western delta becomes a thriving commercial colony where Greek merchants exchange olive oil and silver for Egyptian grain and linen. This fragile equilibrium shatters in 525 before the Common Era, when Cambyses II of Persia invades. The Battle of Pelusium ends Egyptian independence, and the Achaemenid Empire absorbs the Nile Valley as a satrapy. Persian administration proves uneven. Darius I commissions the completion of a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, a monumental engineering project marked by granite stelae inscribed in Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. At the Karga oasis, deep in the western desert, the Temple of Hebes rises under Persian patronage, its painted reliefs depicting Egyptian gods in traditional style, evidence that the conquerors understand the political value of respecting local religion. Still, resentment smoulders. Revolts erupt repeatedly through the 5th century before the Common Era, and around 404, Egypt briefly throws off Persian rule entirely. The 28th through 30th dynasties represent the final chapter of native pharaonic authority. These last independent kings fortify the delta approaches and build ambitious temples, but their reigns are shadowed by the constant threat of Persian reconquest. Nectanebo I repels a massive Persian invasion in 373, exploiting flooded delta channels to neutralize the enemy's numerical advantage. His grandson Nectanebo II, ascending the throne around 360, becomes the last native Egyptian to rule as pharaoh. He commissions temple construction across the land, from Philae in the south to Behbeit el-Haga in the delta, as though monumental building might anchor sovereignty in stone. The effort proves futile. In 343 before the Common Era, the Persian king Artaxerxes III launches an overwhelming invasion. Nectanebo flees south into Nubia and vanishes from the historical record. Egypt enters its second Persian occupation, a bitter decade of foreign control. Temple economies are disrupted, and Egyptian sources remember this period with particular hostility. The land waits, restless and diminished, its 3,000-year tradition of native kingship extinguished. When liberation finally comes, it arrives not from within but from the west, carried on the spears of a Macedonian army marching out of a world Egypt's earliest pharaohs could never have imagined. In the autumn of 332 before the Common Era, Alexander of Macedon crosses into Egypt without meeting significant resistance. The Persian garrison at Pelusium opens its gates. Memphis welcomes him as a liberator. The young conqueror, barely 24 years old, performs sacrifices to the Apis bull in the ancient capital, a gesture the Persian occupiers had refused, and one that instantly signals a different kind of foreign rule. Before consolidating his conquest, Alexander undertakes a remarkable journey. He marches westward along the Mediterranean coast, then turns south into the Libyan desert toward the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis. The trek covers nearly 300 kilometers through waterless terrain. At the temple, the priests greet him as Son of Amun, a title that in Egyptian tradition confirms divine kingship. Whatever Alexander personally believes, the political effect is immediate. He departs Siwa as a pharaoh sanctioned by Egypt's oldest theological authority. On the return journey, he pauses at a strip of land between the Mediterranean and Lake Mareotis. Here, on a site blessed with natural harbors and freshwater access, he orders the founding of a new city. His architect Dinocrates lays out a grid plan of broad intersecting avenues, the two widest stretching nearly 5 kilometers. Alexandria rises where the Nile Delta meets the sea, oriented not toward the river valley, but toward the Mediterranean world beyond. Alexander never returns. He marches east toward Persia and India, and dies in Babylon in 323 before the Common Era. His general Ptolemy, son of Lagos, seizes Egypt and the royal corpse, installing both in Memphis before eventually transferring the capital to Alexandria. The dynasty he founds will rule for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies govern through deliberate cultural fusion. They adopt pharaonic titles, build temples in purely Egyptian style, and maintain the ancient priesthoods. Yet Alexandria itself becomes the most cosmopolitan city in the Mediterranean. Its population swells past 500,000, Greeks, Egyptians, Jews, Phoenicians, and traders from across the known world filling its colonnaded streets. 2 structures come to define the city's ambition. The Pharaoh's lighthouse, completed around 280 before the Common Era under Ptolemy II, rises over 100 meters on the island of Pharos, its mirror-amplified flame visible perhaps 50 kilometers out to sea. It becomes one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Nearby, the Mausion and its great library accumulate an estimated 400,000 papyrus scrolls, the largest repository of knowledge in antiquity. Scholars from across the Greek world gather here. Euclid codifies geometry. Eratosthenes calculates the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy. Beyond Alexandria, the Ptolemies prove themselves prolific temple builders in the Egyptian heartland. At Edfu, construction begins around 237 before the Common Era on a temple dedicated to Horus. Built over 180 years, its massive pylon gateway rises 36 meters, its walls covered in ritual scenes rendered in traditional Egyptian style, yet funded by Greek-speaking monarchs. The temple at Dendera, the additions at Philae and Com Ombo, all follow this pattern of Ptolemaic patronage preserving pharaonic religion. The Rosetta Stone, carved in 196 before the Common Era under Ptolemy V, captures this duality in granite. A single priestly decree inscribed in 3 scripts, hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek, it embodies a kingdom that must speak multiple languages to hold itself together. The decree grants tax exemptions and cult privileges, a negotiation between Greek rulers and Egyptian priests that keeps the ancient temples functioning. Yet beneath the cosmopolitan surface, tensions simmer. Native Egyptian revolts erupt repeatedly in Upper Egypt throughout the 2nd century before the Common Era. The Ptolemaic army increasingly depends on Egyptian-born soldiers, blurring the ethnic hierarchies the dynasty initially enforced. Dynastic murders, sibling marriages, and succession wars weaken the royal house from within. Rome, growing ever more powerful across the Mediterranean, begins to cast a long shadow over Alexandria's gleaming harbor. The lighthouse still burns, but the dynasty that built it is slowly consuming itself. By 51 before the Common Era, the Ptolemaic dynasty has nearly devoured itself. Palace coups, poisonings, and fratricidal wars have reduced the once magnificent royal house to a desperate scramble for survival. Into this chaos steps Cleopatra VII, 18 years old, co-regent with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, and already fluent in 9 languages including Egyptian, a tongue no Ptolemaic ruler before her had bothered to learn. She is the first of her dynasty to speak directly to the native priesthood without interpreters, and this single fact reshapes her relationship with the ancient temples that still anchor Egyptian identity. Exiled by her brother's advisors within 2 years, Cleopatra gathers an army near the eastern frontier. Her return to Alexandria coincides with the arrival of Julius Caesar, who pursues a Roman political rival into Egyptian waters in 48 before the Common Era. The alliance that forms between the young queen and the most powerful man in the Roman Republic is both personal and strategic. Caesar's legions restore Cleopatra to the throne. Their son, Caesarion, born around 47 before the Common Era, represents something unprecedented, a child with claims to both Roman power and pharaonic legitimacy. At the Temple of Dendera in Upper Egypt, a massive relief carved into the rear wall depicts Cleopatra and Caesarion offering to the gods in full pharaonic regalia, mother and son rendered in the timeless conventions of Egyptian sacred art. Caesar's assassination in Rome in 44 before the Common Era shatters this arrangement. Cleopatra navigates the ensuing Roman civil wars with extraordinary diplomatic precision, eventually aligning with Mark Antony, Caesar's former lieutenant and now ruler of Rome's eastern territories. Their partnership, formalized at Antioch, grants Egypt control over portions of Phoenicia, Crete, and Cyrenaica. For a brief moment, the Ptolemaic realm expands to dimensions not seen in generations. Antony and Cleopatra's coinage circulates across the eastern Mediterranean, her profile appearing on silver tetradrachms, a strong-jawed portrait far removed from later romantic fantasies. But Rome will not tolerate a rival power center. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, wages a propaganda campaign portraying Antony as enslaved by a foreign queen. The confrontation comes at Actium, off the western coast of Greece, on the 2nd of September, 31 before the Common Era. Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet of perhaps 500 warships faces Octavian's navy under the command of Marcus Agrippa. The battle turns decisively. Cleopatra's squadron breaks through the line and sails for Egypt. Antony follows. The remaining fleet surrenders or burns. The following summer, Octavian's legions march into Egypt virtually unopposed. Antony falls on his own sword. Cleopatra, captured and facing the humiliation of being paraded through Rome in chains, takes her own life in August of 30 before the Common Era. Ancient sources attribute her death to the bite of an asp, though the precise method remains uncertain. Caesarion, the last person to bear the title of pharaoh, is executed on Octavian's orders shortly after. Egypt becomes a Roman province, governed not by the Senate, but as the personal estate of the emperor. So vital are its grain shipments to feeding Rome. The temples continue to function, priests still chant in the ancient tongue, and hieroglyphs are still carved on new temple walls. But the throne of the two lands stands empty. 3,000 years of pharaonic rule end not with the collapse of monuments, but with the quiet administrative stroke of a Roman decree. The lighthouse at Alexandria still casts its beam across the harbor, illuminating a world that now belongs entirely to Rome. For 3 centuries after Cleopatra's death, Egypt feeds Rome. Grain ships depart Alexandria's harbor in vast convoys, carrying the harvest of the Nile to sustain 1 million Roman mouths. The temples remain open. Priests at Dendera, Esna, and Philae still carve hieroglyphs into fresh sandstone, still perform the ancient rites. Roman emperors appear on temple walls dressed as pharaohs, offering incense to Isis and Horus, maintaining a fiction of continuity that serves political stability. But the living tradition thins with each generation. Fewer scribes can read the old script. Fewer priests understand the theology encoded in its signs. Christianity spreads through Egypt with remarkable speed. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, Alexandria becomes one of the faith's great intellectual centers. The catechetical school produces theologians whose influence reshapes Christian doctrine across the Mediterranean. Coptic, the final evolution of the ancient Egyptian language now written in Greek letters with 7 additional characters, becomes the tongue of scripture and liturgy. In village after village, crosses are carved over hieroglyphs. Temple chambers become churches. The goddess Isis nursing Horus finds quiet echo in icons of the Virgin and Child. In 392, Emperor Theodosius I orders the closure of all pagan temples throughout the empire. 2 years later, on the 24th of August, 394, a priest at Philae carves a short demotic inscription on the Gate of Hadrian. It is the last known hieroglyphic text. A writing system that endured more than 33 centuries falls silent. The knowledge of how to read it vanishes within a generation. The Islamic conquest arrives in 641 under the general Amr ibn al-As. Cairo rises near the ruins of ancient Memphis. The pyramids endure as objects of wonder, their purpose debated, their builders half forgotten. Sand drifts across temple floors. Colossi sink into accumulated silt. For over 1,000 years, the civilization sleeps beneath the desert. Rediscovery begins with Napoleon's expedition in 1798. 167 scholars accompanying the army document temples, tombs, and inscriptions with meticulous precision. A soldier digging fortifications near Rosetta uncovers a slab of black granodiorite bearing 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. The stone travels to London after the French surrender, but a young scholar in Paris named Jean-François Champollion spends years comparing its texts. In 1822, he cracks the code, recognizing that hieroglyphs function as both phonetic and ideographic signs. The ancient voices speak again. What follows is a century of revelation. Flinders Petrie introduces systematic excavation methods, replacing treasure hunting with stratigraphic discipline. In 1922, Howard Carter peers through a small hole into the tomb of Tutankhamun and finds over 5,000 artifacts sealed for 32 centuries. The golden death mask becomes the most recognized face from antiquity. Excavations continue into the present day. The Grand Egyptian Museum near Giza, housing over 100,000 artifacts, stands within sight of the pyramids it honors. Each season brings new discoveries. Previously unknown tombs at Saqqara, workshops where mummification was performed, papyri revealing administrative details of pyramid construction. Satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar detect chambers and structures invisible to the naked eye. Modern Luxor wakes at dawn with minarets and temple pylons sharing the same skyline. Feluccas drift past the same riverbanks where reed boats carried grain 5,000 years ago. The Nile still floods, though the Aswan High Dam now controls its rhythm. The civilization that grew from black silt and river water proved more durable than the empires that conquered it. Its calendar shaped the one the world uses today. Its medical observations informed Greek physicians. Its architectural principles still challenge modern engineers. Its questions about death, judgment, and eternity echo through every major faith that followed. the sand has not yet surrendered everything it holds. Thank you for journeying through the complete story of ancient Egypt. If this series has brought the past alive for you, consider subscribing so you never miss a new exploration into the civilizations that shaped our world.